Hey, everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Do you ever go to Mount Rushmore on a family vacation or travel or anything like that? The Black Hills of western South Dakota bleed over into eastern Wyoming, and they're like the furthest east little extension of the Rocky Mountains in the United States. And they're just beautiful. They don't have all the ruggedness of the high Rockies in Colorado or western Wyoming, which I also love. But they're mountains that are like how a kid draws a mountains, with pine trees coming up and green grass running right up to them, great trout fishing. And my family is here. My mom's side is from the little Black Hills region here in western South Dakota. My dad's side is from eastern Wyoming. And more recently, I guess you think of the Black Hills as being a South Dakota phenomenon. But when you look at the old maps and you look at how people categorized or thought of the Black Hills area, it encompassed a much larger area extending over toward Guernsey, where there's now Guernsey Reservoir in Wyoming, and Torrington, Wyoming, and Devil's Tower, and all of this. It's a really unique geographic area. Well, whatever the case, when you're talking with people about where you're from when you travel, it can be a little bit tricky to nail it down depending on how far you are from home. So for me, being somebody who is from Rapid City, South Dakota, which sits right up against the Black Hills where they rise up and go up to higher altitude, I might tell someone from just down the road in Deadwood, South Dakota, that I'm from Rapid City. But if I met somebody from eastern South Dakota or Minnesota or Nebraska, somebody who would be regionally familiar with the area, I might say I'm from the Black Hills. And that would generally get it done. If I'm clear on the other end of the country, in Florida, or even traveling overseas, I would just reference the thing that would be most well known about the place where I live to help people identify that. So when I lived in western Wyoming, I would say, I live near Yellowstone. You know, Old Faithful, the geyser that shoots up out of the ground, and people will be like, oh, yeah. I've seen that on the TV. I've seen pictures of that. And now, of course, I would say, well, we live very close to Mount Rushmore. You know, the carving of the presidents they got up in the Stone Mountain there in the United States. And people are always like, oh, yeah, of course, we've seen that. I'm like, all right, well, then you can kind of picture where I'm from. But the term Black Hills could mean a ton of different things. If you understand this basic social finessing that you use when you try to vaguely explain where you're from or where somebody else is from to people who might not specifically know those details, then you can understand an age-old biblical text confusion that we run into here in Matthew chapter 14 about a couple of geographical locations that have similar sounding names that could just naturally get confused, but also that are sometimes used to lump and refer to regions, not just a single place. So we're in Matthew chapter 14. Jesus has just calmed the storm again after walking on water, and we're not totally done with that story yet, but hear me out here. And so, he climbs in the boat, and the wind dies down, and then Matthew 14:33, it says, Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, Truly, you are the Son of God. Obviously more to talk about there. But it goes on in verse 34 to say, when they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country, and then people brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. Again, so much to unpack, but today we're just working on geography. So you got these three locations that come up, and throughout the course of Christian history, these three location names will all be used interchangeably, even though they really are talking about different things, and in one of these cases, a very different thing. So in the previous Calming of the Storm episode, which is back in Matthew chapter 8, all right, we get this. Then Jesus got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, and the waves swept over, and they're freaked out. And he says, you have little faith, why are you so afraid? And then he got up and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. And they were like, whoa, what kind of person is this? Who is this guy? And then it goes on to say, when he arrived at the other side in the region of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men, and then we get the situation where the demons come out and they answer the question the disciples couldn't. Who is this guy? He's the Son of God. But here Matthew uses language to describe this as the region of the Gadarenes. Well, the name of the region is drawn from the name of a significant town on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, the town of Gadara. I think I'm saying that right. Now, the town of Gadara is not actually on the Sea of Galilee, if I understand correctly. I guess it would be in modern-day Jordan, a little bit south of the Sea of Galilee, and on the east side of the Sea of Galilee / the Jordan River. So this region of Gadara is obviously a place that is more Gentile-ish. Maybe there's some old Jewish influences there, but you got pigs over there. I mean, this is not a place that carefully adheres to Jewish thought or Jewish religion. It's a little bit more Greekified. But in some translations and in other accounts of this same story, you won't hear the reference to the region of the Gadarenes. You will hear it characterized as the region of the Gerasenes. But these aren't really different places, because Gerasa is the third largest city of this region, and it's even further south and east of the Sea of Galilee. But the biggest city over there is Gergesa, and there's a term that has fallen out of favor. You don't see it in the text very much anymore. That would be like the Gergesenes. So sometimes you will hear this region on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus went and cast the demons out into pigs in Matthew chapter 8. You'll hear this area referred to as the country of the Gergesenes, the Gadarenes, and the Gerasenes. Now, this is one of those places where people might look at the Bible and be like, you can't get basic geography right. How do you expect me to believe this document that makes all these crazy, ludicrous claims? And you're like, well, the eyewitnesses are all reliable, when your Bible authors can't even get this basic geography right. But here's the thing. They are getting this basic geography right. I mean, if you wanted to describe somebody Turkey, not like the food, but like the place, would you say Turkey? Or would you say Anatolia? Or would you say Byzantium? Or would you say Constantinople? And really the correct answer to that question is, well, when are you asking the question? Because if you're talking about now, Turkey would be the right word. If you're talking about another time, Byzantium would be the right term for that place. Even Old New York was once New Amsterdam. And likewise, each of these relatively speaking prominent towns in this lightly populated region on the east and southeast side of the Sea of Galilee, each of these towns have lent their name to this region at one point or another. Black Hills is this encompassing name for a whole collection of little communities and little stuff. And you might say, I'm from Rapid City, and use that interchangeably for I'm from the Black Hills. Or you might say, I'm from the country of Mount Rushmore, and mean that you're from Rapid City or the Black Hills. It would all be true. It's just which term you would use to describe it depends on when you're asking. For example, you wouldn't say you're from the country of Mount Rushmore before Mount Rushmore was carved. And it depends on who you're talking to and what makes sense for them. If somebody's interested in what town you're from and what the cities are like there, you might say from Rapid City. If they're interested in a geographical region that just gives them a basic idea, you might say you're from the Black Hills. Likewise, the country of the Gergesenes, the country of the Gadarenes, the country of the Gerasenes are all the same country. It's just that at different points in the classical world, each of those communities seems to have lent their name to this location. Well, the result of that can be a ton of confusion, because you get this account in Matthew chapter 8 of these pigs going off a cliff. Well, Gerasa isn't near a cliff, and Gadara isn't near a cliff, but Gergesa is right on a cliff at about the 3 o'clock position on the Sea of Galilee. So if we were to say Jesus sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, that doesn't mean he went to the town of Gerasa. But if he went to the town of Gergesa, right on that cliff, he would still be in the region of the Gerasenes. So region of the Gergesenes, Gadarenes, or Gerasenes, we're all talking about the same thing, but it's relatively clear from the first calming of the storm account in Matthew chapter 8 that Jesus was in the region of the Gerasenes, Gadarenes, or Gergesenes, whatever you want to call it, but that specifically he was in the town of Gergesa, because that geographically fits the description of the event that unfolded there with the pigs running over the cliff. But further confusing this issue is what we run into in the passage that we're just starting to touch here at the end of Matthew chapter 14, and that's that we get another location name that has a lot of those same letters, and at times people have mixed up this new location name that's being introduced with the locations we've been talking about here. And this new location is Gennesaret, or Gennesaret. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. That's what it says in Matthew 14 at the end of the second occurrence of Jesus calming the storm. But Gennesaret is in about the 10 o'clock position on the Sea of Galilee, on the west side. So in this second calming of the storm, it's inferable in the Gospels that Jesus' disciples were maybe floating to get away over to the east side of the lake. So maybe the storm redirected them and they end up on the west side of the lake, or maybe we're reading into it just a little bit too much and they always were trying to get away to the west side of the lake and we're just misreading the text. It's not really terribly consequential, other than we need to keep from getting confused on where we are at. So in this account in Matthew chapter 14, Jesus ends up in a very Jewish community on the very Jewish west side of the Sea of Galilee. He does not end up back in the place where the Matthew chapter 8, well, really Matthew chapter 9, pig miracle occurs in the country of the Gergesenes, Gadarenes, or Gerasenes. He is in Gennesaret on the other side. Now, intellectual grace to everyone here. There are a lot of reasons that people mix these around and get these confused. I have surely been guilty of that at times as well. It's a little bit confusing, but I think what I just gave you straightens the whole thing out. And having this straight is really important because there's some theological narrative significance here as to whether Jesus is back in a place where he had been previously rejected by not very Jewish people, or if he is still reaching out primarily to the Jewish people and he's actually in a place where they haven't met him yet and they're just receiving him for the first time, and it seems to be a pretty positive reception. It looks like it is the latter, and that Jesus is on the west side of the Sea of Galilee after this second calming of the storm in the community of Gennesaret, not on the east side in the country of the Gergesenes, Gadarenes, Gerasenes, whatever you want to call it. Every now and then we got to do these history and geography and context episodes just to keep the story straight, so we're not reading things into it that aren't there, so we're not inflicting things on it that aren't there, and so that we are getting everything out of it that we can. So thank you for always being so willing to workshop details like this, and hopefully, as always, it will pay off as we dig deeper into what the text is driving at tomorrow and the next day. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.